This was how Romans kept warm before modern heating. Before modern heating, before radiators, before electric heaters and insulated homes, winter was not just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. Even in a place like ancient Rome, which many imagine as sunny and warm all year, winters could be cold, damp, and deeply unpleasant. Cold rain, freezing winds, and long dark nights were a normal part of life. Stone buildings trapped moisture. Narrow streets blocked sunlight, and most homes had little protection from the cold. There were no thermostats, no wall insulation, no central heating like we know it today. Staying warm was not automatic. It was something you had to fight for every single day. So, how did people in ancient Rome survive the winter? The answer depends greatly on who you were, where you lived, and how much money you had. Because in Rome, warmth was not equal. It was a privilege. The cold reality of Roman homes. Most Romans did not live in grand villas. They lived in apartment buildings called insulae. These buildings were often tall, crowded, and cheaply constructed. Some rose 5 or 6 stories high. The walls were made of stone, brick, and concrete, materials that absorbed cold and held on to it. Windows were small and often had no glass. Sometimes they were covered only with cloth or wooden shutters. Gaps in doors and walls let wind pass freely inside. In winter, these homes were cold, dark, and damp. Water could freeze inside. Breath could be seen in the air. Even wealthier homes built from stone and marble were not warm by modern standards. They were designed to survive hot summers, not cold winters. Thick walls kept heat out just as well as they kept heat in. Once the cold settled into the building, it stayed there for months. For most Romans, the only real source of heat was fire. Small charcoal braziers were used inside homes. These were metal containers filled with burning coals. They were placed in the center of rooms or near where people sat and slept. They provided warmth, but only to those sitting close. The heat did not spread far. You had to choose between being warm and being near the smoke. And smoke was a serious problem. Burning charcoal produced toxic fumes. In rooms with poor ventilation, people could become sick, dizzy, or even die in their sleep. Fires were also a constant danger. Roman cities were famous for burning. A single spark could destroy an entire apartment block. Still, people had no choice. Without fire, there was no warmth at all. Clothing as a form of heating. Romans did not rely only on their homes to stay warm. They relied heavily on clothing. Wool was the most important material. It was warm, durable, and widely available. In winter, Romans wore multiple layers. Tunics were layered under cloaks. Heavy woolen cloaks were worn both outdoors and indoors. Some people wrapped cloth around their legs and arms. Hoods, scarves, and head coverings were common. People often slept in their clothes. Warmth was not something you turned on. It was something you carried with you. For the poor, clothing was often their main defense against winter. Living in one room. In many homes, families did not try to heat the entire building. They gathered into one small room, one fire, one shared space. Everyone slept, ate, and worked in the same area during the coldest months. Sometimes, animals were brought indoors, not for comfort, for warmth. Body heat mattered. Crowding was a survival strategy. Sleeping in the cold night was the coldest and most dangerous time. Beds were simple wooden frames. Mattresses were sacks filled with straw, wool, or leaves. Romans used heavy blankets and thick coverings. Sometimes several people slept in the same bed. Children slept beside parents. Servants slept near kitchens or fires. Some households used heated stones or bricks, wrapped in cloth and placed in beds. They slowly released warmth through the night. By morning, the cold returned. Now here is where Rome becomes truly remarkable. The wealthy Romans and public buildings sometimes used something far ahead of its time. The hypocaust system. This was an early form of underfloor heating. Furnaces burned wood or charcoal. Hot air flowed under raised floors and through hollow spaces in the walls. The floors became warm. The rooms slowly filled with heat. This system was used in public bathhouses, wealthy villas, palaces, important government buildings, but not in normal homes. It was expensive. It required constant fuel, and it required workers to maintain it. For most Romans, this was luxury beyond imagination. The public baths, the warmest place in the city. Public bathhouses were not just for washing, they were social centers, and in winter, they were warm refuges. People went there to bathe, talk, relax, and most importantly, warm up. The baths were heated by massive hypocaust systems. Some rooms were hot, some were warm, some were cool. For many poor Romans, this was the only time they felt truly warm. The baths were not a luxury, they were part of survival. City life versus countryside. In the countryside, life was even harder. Farmhouses were simpler, wind moved freely through wooden walls, snow and rain leaked inside, firewood had to be gathered and stored. If fuel ran out, there was no heat. Winter in rural areas was quiet, isolated, and dangerous. People stayed indoors as much as possible. How the poor survived. The poorest Romans lived high up in cold apartment buildings. Heat from street level never reached them. They used small fires, wore many layers, and stayed close together. Cold weakened the body. Illness spread easily. Winter was a season of suffering, not comfort. Work did not stop. Despite the cold, life continued. People still worked, traded, built, traveled with stiff fingers and aching joints. Cold was not an emergency. It was normal. Ancient Rome was advanced in many ways, but even there, warmth was rare, precious, and unevenly shared. Most people lived with cold every winter of their lives. They survived with fire, clothing, crowded rooms, and simple ingenuity. Modern heating did not just make life comfortable, it changed what it meant to live indoors. This was life in the working past. If this was interesting, you'll probably enjoy the rest of the channel. Subscribe if you want to see more forgotten techniques.